Okay, everybody, we're going to go ahead and get started today. As we've done before, I'm going to pass this sign-in sheet around. If you would please sign it. Most of you have already taken advantage of the refreshments. You can certainly keep doing that. I want to welcome you to our fifth workshop today on conciseness and clarity in our writing. And as we've done with the other workshops that we've had, we're going to have a mix of some discussion of specific points, and then we're going to work on some revisions together, give us some time for questions and so forth. So looking at our previous workshops, just as a recap, we started off with an overview of engineering communication, talked about punctuation, then got a little more sophisticated with sentence structure, paragraph development and revision, person and voice. And then, as I said, today we're going into conciseness and clarity. So a couple of specific points about this. First off is just the principle of design simplicity and efficiency as it relates to writing. So we'll just talk about that as a principle. Then we'll look specifically at avoiding be verbs and why that's an issue that we should pay attention to in our writing. Reducing prepositional phrases, and then, as I said, we'll close with some exercises. So on the principle of design simplicity and efficiency, one of the neat things about this type of writing and this type of communication is it's really a perfect analogy with what you do in your fields as engineers. In the same way that you would never be called upon to design a device or a process that had 17 truly extra unnecessary steps, in that exact same way, writing functions just like that. Your writing should never have extra unnecessary words. It's the exact same principle of design efficiency. And there's all kinds of analogies that we have for that. Trimming the fat is one of them. Anything that doesn't accomplish anything or is weighing us down, we try to get rid of it. So it's worth asking why our writing includes unnecessary words in the first place. Where do those come from? Why are they there? This has to do with how we learn language because, and these are general statements. Obviously, this is going to vary for specific people, it's going to vary for cultures, generation gaps, and so forth. But primarily, we learn language behaviorally. We don't sit down and memorize. Overall, we don't sit down and memorize words and sentence structures and so forth. We pick it up through what we encounter in our surroundings, and that's why what I mean by behaviorally. As kids, we learn from the language that we hear around us, primarily from our parents and our family and friends and so forth, and that's how we develop language skills. That continues on into adulthood and into the professional setting. A lot of people who know how to communicate as professionals, some have learned it in classes, some have learned it in various college-related experiences, but a lot of people learn that once they get on the job and they look around and see how everybody else communicates, they hear how everybody else communicates. So that really follows us through our entire lives. And what we can deduce from that then is that language ability often develops through habit. Because it's a behavior, the habits that we cultivate are what help determine how we communicate, in writing and in speaking, but today we're primarily talking about writing. And at least in English, one of the words that often goes with the word habit is bad. We talk about bad habits that we develop as human beings, bad habits in one way or another. And that applies in many facets of life. Communication is one of those. Now, habits themselves stem from not what's simplest or most efficient, because remember, those are our guiding principles of what we're talking about today, simple and most efficient, but what's easiest or most common. And there's a difference here between simple and easy. We tend to fall back on what we know automatically. So in writing, we'll just pick the words that are closest to what we're trying to say, or at least what we think is closest to what we're trying to say, but really it's just the first word that comes to mind, or the first set of words that come to mind, we pick those. A lot of times that's not the simplest or most efficient way to say something. So we've developed this habit of writing in a particular fashion like that. And we have to work to get away from that. So what we want to do is improve language ability by pushing beyond what's easy and common to what is simpler and what is more efficient. We want to actually, as part of our writing process, as part of our editing and revision process, is look for areas where we can make the language simpler and more efficient. Now, one important note here is a distinction between the idea of simple and simpler and the word simplistic, which you may have heard. And especially with undergraduates, which is what we primarily teach in our courses, a lot of times when we stress simple and simpler, they think that means remove the details. Okay? Thermodynamics for fourth graders, as an example. That's the idea that they get, that if we're talking about thermodynamics or soil mechanics or programming languages or something like this, that if we want them to be simple or simpler about it, that somehow they should talk about thermodynamics or soil mechanics or programming languages such that a fourth grader or a 10-year-old could understand it. That is absolutely not what we're talking about. That's a fine thing to do communication-wise, but that's not what we're talking about. And that's what simplistic is. It's watered down is another way that you might hear it, where you remove details. And yes, it's easy to understand, but you don't communicate nearly as much. So because the subject matter that we're communicating is technical itself, is complex, the simple falls on the side of the writing. We want the writing to be as simple and as efficient as it can possibly be, so it doesn't get in the way of technical subject matter. Okay? So that's when we talk about technical writing. The technical has to do with the subject matter, not the way that it's written. So when we stress simple, simpler, efficiency, and so forth, we're not talking about removing details. And it may be that what you've written is still very complex, but hopefully your sentence structure, your word choices are simpler and more efficient and are not getting in the way of the concepts themselves. So let's look at an example. From this initial set of requirements, there are several analyses that can be conducted to determine, and then the rest of the sentence continued. I cut it off in the interest of space. So, like so many of the other examples that we provide in these workshops, there's nothing absolutely right or wrong about this. There's not an error you can look at and say, well, this is spelled incorrectly, or there's an agreement error of some kind. But it has some problems in its word choice. One of them is that this is what's called an expletive. And you may know of the word expletive in terms of profanity. And that's not what this is. Grammatically, an expletive is a word or a phrase that takes the place of another word or phrase. And I believe we've referred to that in a previous workshop. So what happens when you do that is you move around the points of emphasis in the sentence. And in this case, you also necessitate a third word. So that because we've started the main clause here with there are, we eventually have to also include the word that. The problem with this is that as we analyze this sentence, one thing we'll notice is that there are and that serve absolutely no purpose in this sentence. They don't necessarily even hinder the meaning, but that's 3 extra words that we don't need. Now, the more important issue here is that an expletive, which is almost always are, which is a being verb, and we're going to get to verbs of being here in a moment, also often displaces the sentence's true verb. And remember, the verb is what carries the action in the sentence. It's the action part of the sentence. So we're saying here that this has displaced the sentence's true verb. It's taking the place of what is the true verb. What is the true verb in this sentence? What should it be? What's the action? Exactly. It's conducted. That's the true verb in the sentence, not there are. Okay? We could even go further with that and say, what's the true subject in its analyses? So think of the difference in concreteness and detail and specificity between the subject and verb there are and the subject and verb analyses conducted. The second one is far more concrete and full of detail. And it's the one that's actually carrying the action. So let's pause from that example for a minute and talk about this. How can you tell if words are unnecessary? And this is tricky. It's because what we're talking about here, and as we have in some of our other workshops too, is a more advanced type of editing. It goes beyond making sure that we've spelled things correctly, that we've included articles, that we have correct sentence and verb agreement, even the sentence structure itself. But we're looking at the diction to make sure that we're making our writing as lean and as simple and as efficient as possible. How can we tell if words are unnecessary? Very simple premise. But if you can omit words without changing the passage's meaning or its accuracy, that means that those words are unnecessary. And those are important points, because you don't, again, it's not about being simplistic or watering it down. We don't want to change the meaning of what we're saying. We want to retain that meaning, but remove any words that aren't accomplishing anything. Okay? But we also want to make sure that it's accurate. And we editors, those of us who are English teachers, writers, editors, can often help a lot to remove unnecessary language and tighten things up, but we don't know the subject that well, so sometimes the changes we make might change the accuracy. That's why if we do our jobs the right way, we make changes and then say, is this still accurate? We go to the engineers or the scientists and say, have we changed the meaning fundamentally here? And so you have some give and take there. But that's the test. If you can take the words out and not change the meaning, not change the accuracy, then those words were unnecessary. Even if having them there doesn't cause any difficulty, it doesn't do any harm, it's not wrong, we're adding words for no good reason, which we want to avoid doing. So, it's not from this initial set of requirements, there are several analyses that can be conducted to determine. What we want is, from this initial set of requirements, several analyses can be conducted to determine. And again, the question we ask is, does this revised version lose any of the meaning of the original? And it does not. We don't lose anything by losing those three words. It says the same thing. Okay? Now, how meaningful are changes like these? And that's, again, something we want to look at. This is not our entire editing process. It's a part of our editing and proofreading process. When we edit or proofread, we want to look for different levels of issues. We don't want to try to fix everything at once. We want to look at different levels, and this is one level of it. How meaningful are changes like these? 3 unnecessary words in one sentence. Even I can't read for pleasure without looking for sentences that need fixing. Stephen King, famous authors, I'll be reading and thinking, they should have said this a different way. And it doesn't mean that I'm better or smarter than that, far from it. It just means that I'm trained to look for this, so I look for it all the time. Reading the newspaper, oh, that's terrible, it shouldn't be said that way. It's kind of a disease, I don't recommend it. It's something that it's very difficult to turn off. But even I would admit that 3 unnecessary words in one sentence is relatively minor. That's really not that big of an issue. But that's also not the issue. If it was just one sentence we were talking about, we wouldn't care. But when somebody uses unnecessary words in one sentence, chances are very good that they use it in other sentences as well, maybe all the time. So extrapolate that to 3 unnecessary words in every sentence of a 20-page journal article. Then it's a major issue. It's much, much more. In fact, I sat down and did the math. A quick scan of various journals in various fields, a very rough and also quite a broad range of 15 to 25 sentences per journal page in an article. So let's just split the difference and say 20 sentences per page times 3 unnecessary words per sentence. That's 60 unnecessary words per page spread out over a 20-page journal article. That's 1,200 unnecessary words per article. Now I would hope you would have to turn your brain off not to admit that that is a big deal. That's not something that you want to do. Now, when you're at the front end of a writing assignment and you want to make sure that you get finished and you have enough substance, and undergraduates are very quick to say this, well, we have word minimums we have to meet. So they want unnecessary words. They want to say it in as flowery a way as possible so they get to the end. And that's understandable at the front end. Once we've done the work and we actually know our subject and we've put everything together, hopefully that's not going to be a problem. Also, it's a maturity issue. We get to a point where we realize that's the extra words are fluff. We want it to be the meat, not the fat. So even if I've got this wrong by half, that's still 600 unnecessary words per article, which is way too much still. So it can be a very big issue. Certainly not every sentence may have unnecessary words. Some sentences may have 12 unnecessary words. So it's a game of averages, but it's why you want to start looking at it as we're going to do today with some smaller exercises so that you can then apply that to your own writing and get in the habit of writing without the unnecessary words to begin with. And it takes some practice to do that, but it absolutely can be done. where you just realize, I don't want to say it that way at all. Okay, so moving on to be verbs. This is a big part of how we do this. As we already said, the verb is the sentence's action agent. This is what we want in the sentence to carry the action of what we're trying to say. So be is a verb, but it literally means existence. You can almost think of it as just sitting still, because that's really all it says. And where we want verbs to have action, motion, to actually do something, be is the opposite of that. It has no action, it has no motion. It's just sitting still. And it's necessary when we're talking about existence. But too often, and I don't know why this happens necessarily, I'm sure there are probably some good reasons. For some reasons, many people just revert to using be verbs without thinking any further than that. So that's why we want to go back and fix those. So you want to avoid forms of be to ensure that your sentences actually accomplish something. Because when it's just full of be verbs and none of the action verbs, we're not really accomplishing very much of anything. We're stringing be verbs together with words that really ought to be our verbs, but are not. Worth pointing out what the forms of be are. English has so many irregular verbs, and be is one of the most irregular because none of them look like each other, which makes it nice and difficult. But be, is, are, was, were, been, being are the main forms of be that you will see. And those are the ones that literally, as you're editing or proofreading, you want to try to avoid. So let's look at an example for this one. In Figure 7, the explanation of changing from I walls to T walls is depicted. As with the last example, there's nothing absolutely wrong with this sentence. In fact, I got it from student writing. It's not really a bad sentence at all. But as an exercise to look at it and say, okay, are there words that shouldn't be there? And we notice is, which is a be verb. So if is, we've already established is as a be verb doesn't carry any action, where is the action in the sentence? And it might be in multiple places. Speak up. Say it again. Depicted, yes. Explanation. Changing could be. That can operate as a verb. So any of those three might be. It doesn't mean they all have to be, but those are some possibilities for us to think about. So one way to go about revising this then would simply be to take these words and make them the verbs. Make that the action part of the sentence. Figure 7 depicts the explanation of changing from I walls to T walls. No be verb. We actually have an action going on here, and we've shortened the sentence up. Now, one thing you notice too is that the person who wrote this was forced to say it this way because they began like this. In Figure 7, comma, and then they finished off, instead of making Figure 7 the subject. Figure 7 is the doer. You start with the doer of the action, and then you're more likely to get to an action, an active verb itself. The other thing I want to point out is right here, T-I-O-N in English, and it's kind of a fancy word. It's what's called a nominalization. And that is an instance where we've taken a verb and turned it into a noun. So the T-I-O-N indicates a noun. So explain, we've then taken and turned into explanation. That's not a bad thing necessarily. It can be useful. But as we're examining our sentences, when you see a T-I-O-N, almost always that means there's some action there, trapped, wanting to get out. Okay? So that's what that actually means. The other option we could have is explains. Instead of depicts, we could say Figure 7 explains the change from I walls to T walls. So we've used a verb there again, different one. We lost depicted. Both versions are shorter. I'm not sure. It would take somebody who's an expert in this probably to say explains is more correct than depicts. But the point is, we've gotten rid of the be verb. We've made it more active. We've also shortened the sentence so that in was not really doing anything for us. We've shortened the entire thing up, all of which is good. That's a good move all the way around. So very simple premise. find be verbs and get rid of them. That at any time is a very good exercise. Take any piece of writing, remove all the be verbs, make everything more active. And it's surprising how difficult it is. You'll run yourself into corners where you think, oh, I can get rid of these, and then you have a couple left that you can't seem to get rid of. But it's a good exercise to do. Now, moving on to prepositional phrases, reducing these. Like be verbs, prepositional phrases are important. They're necessary. But they grow with sentence complexity, and they're often a first draft phenomenon. So that if you charted somebody's sentences, they would start in a fairly small form, and they would add prepositional phrases. Prepositions like of, to, across, on, and so forth and so on. So they're adding ideas to what they started with, which again is good. We want that we want to, our sentences to grow in complexity, but it can get out of hand. It can get to a point where there are far too many prepositional phrases, and so we have to come back and scale that back a little bit. That wasn't supposed to stay there. There we go. All right, so read this out loud. And we've established this before in other workshops. It's one of my favorite tactics, and it's something I'll say again and again. Reading your writing out loud is very, very instructive. There are things you hear when you read out loud that you don't read if you're just reading silently. Okay? So reading this out loud is very helpful. And because I'm the one with the mic, I'll go ahead and read it. The regenerating of heat to the fluid going back to the system helps to reduce the stress in the piping of the system due to the cold temperatures of the fluid. It sounds silly, right? It's almost sing-songy. Every couple of words, you to thee, of thee, on thee, over and over and over and over. And reading it silently, reading it out loud, there's a problem with the style. And so I've highlighted and read all of what are the prepositional phrases. So as a point of editing, we want to go back looking for conciseness and clarity and clear up some of that. One tip here that's very helpful is to look at of as a possessive. Okay? So taking a generic example, the hat of John, this is a prepositional phrase. Another way of saying that is with the apostrophe S, John's hat. So they both show possession. This is a shorter way of doing it, and you can make that work for you as you go revising. You can look for anything with an of and try to turn that into a possessive. Now, I say try because it's something that you have to almost test to see if it works. You can't just change all the ofs to apostrophe S. It may not work every time, but sometimes it will. So if we see here, the heat's regenerating to the fluid, going back to the system, helps reduce the stress in the system's piping due to the fluid's cold temperatures. Not perfect by any means. It still sounds bad. I want to work on it some more. But it's shorter, and that's 3 instances of the that are not there anymore. Okay? So that's one step toward improving it. That's one of the steps that you can take to help do that. All right, so how do you learn to look for conciseness and clarity? And I've said several times, this is one level of your editing and proofreading that you need to be doing. So how do you learn to look for this? Some very simple steps. One is to write, obviously. You have to get started writing. Very important, take a break and then proofread. 2, as I've already said, read your writing out loud to yourself. Does it sound awkward? If it sounds awkward to you, it probably is awkward. Your ear usually doesn't lie in that way to you. Your inner ear will lie all day long because it sort of sounds the way you want it to sound. But when you hear it, you'll go, no, that's not right. Do you run out of breath? The sentence may be too long at that point. Okay? Edit specifically for unnecessary words. Edit specifically for forms of be and prepositional phrases. And when I say edit specifically, I mean have a pass through what you've written where this is the only thing you look for. Don't pay attention to misspellings. Don't pay attention. Just only look for these. Because if you start looking at other things, you'll get distracted and you'll start seeing everything at that point. And you'll go completely off the road into the weeds. So you have to take time, and again, that's one of the issues here with doing this. It takes time. It's not something that you can write all the way up to the deadline and then do this in 30 minutes and have it finished and turn it in. That's not the way to go. You're not going to get it edited and proofread correctly if you do that. 5, write, take a break, proofread, repeat. The take a break portion of these is extremely, extremely, extremely important. Why? Why is that important? Let's approach it this way. So you've written something that has to be turned in at 5 o'clock, let's just say, and it's taking you till 4:30 to get it done. So you have from 4:30 to 5 until it has to be submitted. How likely are you to find things that are wrong in those 30 minutes? What is your attitude about what you've written in that 30 minutes? Do you think it's great? Probably. In some way. Typically, people either think, this is the best thing I've ever written. I used to hate it when students would say, this is a really good paper. Because usually it wasn't. When they would say that, I would think, oh. And I learned, as a novice teacher, they said that, oh, that's great, terrific, trying to be encouraging. And then I read it and I went, wow, that's very, very problematic. And so I learned after a while when they would say, this is the best paper I ever wrote, I almost would say, don't say that. Don't say it. Let's not, And conversely, the other would happen. People would say, well, I waited too long and this isn't very good. And it was usually better than they thought. That was mainly freshmen, and freshmen have very funny ideas about what works and what doesn't. So, but typically people who are right up next to a deadline either think it's fantastic or they're more self-aware and they realize this is really bad, or it's just not perfect, it's not good, but I have to turn it in anyway. So there we go. When you take a break, 2 hours even, like some length of time where you just get the writing out of your head, you often will not remember, it's not your writing anymore when you look back at it. It's unfamiliar, and that's when you'll start to take the knife to it and cut things out and move things around and do this. These set of slides, for example, I've been working, I didn't work on them all during spring break, but I started before spring break several days. I worked on them a lot yesterday and a lot today, and I would go to class and come back and sit down and immediately see like 5 things that I didn't see beforehand. Oh, this should say this, or this should be here. The order doesn't make any sense. But if you try to compress that all into one span of time, it's not going to work because you won't see everything. You can't try to see everything at once. That's why taking a break from it is important, and that's not telling you have some leisure and just don't get in a hurry and don't worry about anything. It's to start early enough to allow yourself to take a break so that you get some of it written and you take 2 days off and go back and look at it. You'll probably get a lot of good revising done after you take 2 days off. But if you wait until the very last minute, it's going to be very, very difficult. And again, the key is that, and the key is to make sure you edit specifically for those issues. And there are other issues we've talked about this semester that you want to make sure you edit specifically for those as well. Editing is typically a multi-step process when it's done correctly. Ideally, that's what we want to do. All right, so let's look at some revisions, starting off with some very simple ones, keeping in mind the idea of simpler and more efficient. What's a simpler, more efficient version of due to the fact that? Think about what that means. Due to, sure. So that. It might not work in everyone, but it could. How about one word that will replace it? Yeah. Due to the fact that means because. 5 words or 1 word. It's pretty silly when you look at it like that to take 5 over 1. And this is one of those phrases that people just love due to the fact that. They just love saying due to the fact. And I don't know why. I would like to study it and find out, but there's something about the sound of it that's just better than because. but because is the exact same thing. It's 4 words too many. How about has the ability to? Yes. There are other versions. Somebody said capable. That could certainly be part of it. But this is really extreme. Has the ability to. People like this even more than they like this. Our program has the ability to, blah, blah, blah. All it means is our program can. That's all it means. 3 letters. That's all it is. But this, because it has more syllables, I think people are trained to think if it has more syllables that somehow it's more important. And that's just silly. It's absolutely not true. It might be, but not automatically. In this case, it absolutely isn't. What about utilize? That's an interesting one. Use. Is there a difference? Is there a time when utilize means more than use means? Say that again? Yeah, if you look up utilize in a dictionary, you'll probably find some shades of meaning that have to do with exploitation. Not exploitation in a negative sense, but exploiting a technology to its fullest potential, for example. And the analogy I always use is a teacher in a classroom who's utilizing technology is not just opening the box from Dell or HP. I mean, they're actually embedding computers or tablets or smart boards or something in the curriculum. It's part of pedagogical goals and so forth. They're not just, here's a smart board, let's turn it on. I mean, they're actually embedding it in the curriculum. So yes, it can mean more than use, but in my experience, in 15 years of looking at engineering writing, usually people just mean use. But utilize sounds better to a lot of people. And I honestly think it has to do with the fact that it has a Z in it. There's just something cool about that word. It's utilize. That use is somehow, it's not fancy enough, it's not, fancy is probably the best way of saying it, that utilize is somehow more important. And it might be, but if all you mean is use, why not just say that? Okay? And as I tell my undergraduates, I'm not even really saying don't do any of these things, because it's that in itself is not so much the issue as realizing what you are doing. Don't fool yourself into thinking that has the ability to is just much stronger and more important than can, because it's not. It's just extra syllables. Utilize might carry some meaning beyond use, but if it doesn't, then you're just using extra syllables. My mentor in grad school used to say, have a good reason for every word that you use. And he really meant that. He expected us that if he pointed to any word in what we wrote, to say, why did we say it that way? Why did you pick that one particular word? And that's tremendously difficult to do when on page 11 he goes, you use the word merit here. Why did you say that? I don't know. I have no idea why I said that there. But as a writer, it's important to have those thoughts. Why am I saying it that way? Am I just sort of spitting language out, or am I using them with purpose? So it's an important exercise to do. We want to make sure that we're able to do that. It is shown that colder O-rings become brittle. A little bit more complex this time. Okay. Colder O-rings have been shown to become brittle. Let me stick one in here. It'd be a great idea. Remember from our first example? This is an expletive again. Same thing as there are. It is a placeholder for other. And in this case, we wound up with 2 extra words after it is. And I picked this as an example because it's very, very common in research writing, for example, for writers to refer to the tests they've run and say, it is shown that it was found that, which is a good start to saying it, but it's really unnecessary to say it all that way. And Garrett had more the right idea by beginning with colder O-rings, have been shown to. Tests show colder O-rings become brittle. Or maybe even just colder O-rings become brittle. Just say it flat out. Okay? Now, there may be some reason why you want to qualify it by saying have been shown to become brittle to not be as certain, but if you have a fair amount of certainty, there's no reason why you can't just say it that way. Or refer back to your test. Instead of it is shown, which is very vague, tests show, that relates directly to the work that you're talking about. So you're actually referring to what you've already done, which is good. This paper makes available many of the things to be used for making a decision on the best data collection method. That just sounds awful.
I'm sorry, I would like to ask you something about this before saying this. What about the form you use the verb? For example, the time I use, or the right I use, for example, it is shown. When you convert this time of the verb in the present tense show. What about the time of the verb you have to use when you...
This is still present. It is shown that it's, even though shown is a past participle, keeps it in present. And now, if it wasn't, it would be was. It was shown, which would sort of indicate that we showed it before and maybe now things have changed. It is would keep it in present. This is very obviously present. Tests show this. So if time was an issue, then you'd have to test showed. You might have to put it in past somehow. But both of these are actually present tense, so the time is the same for both of those. So this paper makes available many of the things to be used for making a decision on the best data collection method. There's a lot to fix in that one.
This paper is used for making a decision on the best data collection method.
Okay. Feels good to cross all that out. Okay, that's a good start. Probably picking up on the microphone. That's how loud it is. Okay. Maybe. For deciding. Okay. This paper is used for deciding on the best data collection method. So we're moving in the right direction there. There's a lot that we don't need to say. And that's the idea. And there are all kinds of ways we could do it. The one I came up with as an example was this paper presents criteria for determining the best data collection method. So actually looking at it now, deciding might be better than determining. It's a little bit shorter, basically means the same thing. But criteria, instead of makes available many of the things to be used for, we reduce that to presents criteria, and that's what we're talking about. All these are fairly simple words, but there's many of them. Here we have two, a little bit more complicated words, but in 2 words we said what it took 7 or 8 words to say right there. That's how we want to do it. Best data collection method, we left that the same. Okay. That's what we want to do. We want to find ways to make those changes. Oh, this one's tough. The tremendous reaction rate growth was mainly a result of the increase of the temperature of the catalyst for the reaction of nitrogen hydrogenation to ammonia. I wish I could say I made that sentence up, but I didn't. This came out of a piece of writing that I was looking at. I always keep either a piece of paper to scribble on or an open Word document so that if I think this is a great example to use, and cut it and paste it and put it in the Word document and then end up using it in something like this. All right, so instead of trying to take it all at once, the things we've talked about today already, being verbs and prepositional phrases. Let's take those a piece at a time. Is there a being verb here? Was, right. Was is a being verb. Okay. Of the increase, of the, for the, of nitrogen. To is not always a preposition, but it is here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 prepositional phrases in that short amount of time. Okay. So what might we have as a verb instead of was? Okay, result. Result would be a good verb. Okay. The tremendous reaction rate growth mainly resulted from increase of the temperature of the catalyst. Catalyst temperature. The tremendous reaction rate growth mainly resulted from the catalyst temperature increase for the reaction of nitrogen hydrogenation to ammonia. How about for the nitrogen hydrogenation's reaction to ammonia? Is that doable? I have to say I don't know. I'm not sure content-wise. I don't necessarily know. But let's pretend like it'll work for now. Okay, so how would we word that then if we leave reaction out?
Hydrogenation will be our verb and reaction.
I don't quite follow that.
Nitrogen hydrogenation is hydrogenation is
So just say it that way then? The tremendous reaction rate growth mainly resulted from the catalyst temperature increase for the nitrogen hydrogenation to ammonia. Is that correct? He's saying no.
We could actually base the entire last thing right at the first, the tremendous reaction rate growth of nitrogen hydrogenation to ammonia and the rest that we use.
Okay, so I forgot how he said to change colors. So I won't do it. The tremendous reaction rate growth of nitrogen hydrogenation to ammonia I'm sorry, say that one more time.
Hydrogenation
But then we have two ofs back to back. That's something we want to avoid. Of hydrogenation of nitrogen. We want to avoid the two back to back like that.
Probably you can don't use hydrogenation. You suppose when nitrogen passed to ammonia, it was hydrogenation. You can say for the reaction of nitrogen to ammonia.
The reaction of nitrogen to ammonia. And keep that at the end or at the beginning?
I think it's better at the beginning.
Okay.
To doesn't lose.
The tremendous reaction rate growth of the reaction of nitrogen to ammonia. I think we're still grappling with the two ofs.
Remove the first reaction.
Remove this.
Yeah. I think if you go with the last phrase to the first one, you will avoid growth and have the word increase rate. That will be so that it would be nice growth.
The tremendous increase of nitrogen to ammonia. What's that?
The tremendous increase of the rate growth.
Of. It's tricky. Let's clean it up a little bit, see what else we can do with it. So, the tremendous reaction rate growth mainly resulted from the increase of the, resulted from the catalyst temperature's increase. So pretty confident about that. It's the rest of it that becomes a problem. Okay?
The tremendous rate growth in nitrogen hydrogenation to ammonia was due to the temperature, the catalyst temperature increase.
Okay, so the tremendous, did you get rid of this reaction?
Yeah, that's the tremendous rate growth
In?
in nitrogen hydrogenation to ammonia.
But if we want to avoid was, then we might say, and we could take out mainly and just say resulted from the catalyst temperature's increase. Tremendous rate growth in nitrogen hydrogenation to ammonia resulted from the catalyst temperature's increase.
It would be good to say from the increase of catalyst temperature. Yeah, that's not sound good, I think.
What about the tremendous growth rate? So will it be right if I rewrite the sentence like the increase in catalyst temperature for the reaction of nitrogen to ammonia resulted in tremendous rate growth?
I have to say that I don't know enough about it to say whether that's correct or not. But I don't see why it wouldn't be, with the way you said it. I think that probably works. Here's a version when I worked with this before in a previous workshop that somebody came up with. Higher catalyst temperature increased the ammonia synthesis reaction rate. What's that?
That's a lot of chemistry.
It is a lot of chemistry. It was probably a chemist that said that, or at least a chemical engineering student, maybe. All right. We worked on that one pretty well. By covering the arc of the weld with flux, heat is better retained, harmful UV emissions from the arc are eliminated, and splatter created by the arc is heavily reduced.
Covering the arc of the weld with flux resulted in the elimination of harmful UV emissions, reduction of splatter created by the arc, retention.
You're headed in the right direction, but we can make it even simpler than that. Covering the arc of the weld with flux. What? Not resulted in. You're kind of stringing along with another word instead of getting right to the verb. What does covering the arc of the weld with flux do? Retains, eliminates, reduces. Covering the weld's arc with flux retains heat more effectively, eliminates harmful UV emissions from the arc, and heavily reduces arc splatter. And we do a couple of things here. We get rid of 3 be verbs, is, are, and is. The other thing we get away from is passive voice, which we talked about in a previous workshop. Passive voice is nearly always a form of be plus a past participle, and it's useful in certain circumstances. Specifically in scientific writing, when you want to avoid referring to yourself. Instead of saying, I did this, then you say, this was done. Here, we don't have that problem because we're not talking about ourselves. So we want to make something active, which we've done with covering. It retains, it eliminates, and it reduces. So we've got nice active verbs, no passive, and we've shortened it up a little bit. Okay. Much like in figure 7 in that previous example, when we start by covering the arc of the well with flux, we set ourselves up to have to say it this way, which is what I mean earlier when I said it's sort of like a first draft phenomenon, that we get sentences, it's a first draft, it's a fine way to start, but if we had another round of editing or proofreading on it, we might wind up with this, which is far superior to the previous version. Okay? We're accomplishing more in that span of time. Okay, in the interest of time, I'm going to skip this one. For this one, we have about half an hour left. I actually have this as a handout for us to look at together. And I think, how many do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10, 11, 12. So if we did 6 pair, if you pair off, then you can work on these. I'll just go ahead and pass these around. Everybody take one. And so what you want to do is apply some of what we talked about today to this passage right here. Don't pay attention to anything but conciseness and clarity, specifically being verbs, prepositional phrases, eliminating unnecessary verbiage. Skip ahead for a second to tell you, I also have this at the bottom of the handout. There's enough handouts for everybody, but then you can work in pairs and work on editing it. I've given you the links, the full Purdue OWL site. They have a good link on conciseness, which we've been talking about today, and also one on improving sentence clarity, which does avoid some work on being verbs. So you've got these links here. Tomorrow I'll have these slides up on our website so you can just go to them and access them, but you have them on the bottom of that sheet as well. All right, so go ahead and get in pairs, however you want to do that, and start looking at revising these, and we'll see if we have some time to look at a few before we go today. Were there extras of those? I think that's it back there. Thanks. Also, those of you that came in a little bit late, did you get to sign in? Yeah. If you guys didn't sign in, if you would, please sign in for me. Hey. I debated, but if we have time, I may get one or two revisions written up there, and I wouldn't mind having that recorded. So,
I guess I should have showed you how to pause it.
oh, it's fine. It's no big deal.
Give feedback a little bit.
Okay.
Should I read it? It's readable.
I'll read it. Yeah. That's good. That's much better. Can we write this up there as an example to show? I'll write it up and we kind of use that one as an example. Okay? Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Okay, so parallelism is a concern, and maybe I missed your lecture on it. But would we be able to say, if we combine sentences here, this particular type of insulation has a high thermal resistance, comma, is inexpensive, comma, and is easy to apply?
Mm-hmm.
But we need that is also.
Yeah, you would, because you just basically break it into three parts.
Yeah.
1, 2, and 3. And if one of them has a verb, unless that one verb can apply to all of them,
Yeah.
then they all, and has cannot apply. Has inexpensive doesn't make any sense. And has easy to apply doesn't make any sense. So it has to be has is, and is. So yes,
Okay.
it would have to be the verb in all three places.
So it would be parallel?
Yes, that would be parallel, exactly. It would be. Because it all, and the other way you can do that is to read them separately. This particular type of installation has a high thermal resistance. This particular type of insulation isn't expensive. This particular type of insulation is easy to apply, and that's how you can tell that it's parallel. So you can put it together like that for sure. All right, we have about 6 or 7 minutes left. So let's look at one revision and see what we think about it. This one says, fiberglass is perhaps the most common insulation. Oops. Should say type. Most common insulation type, which is inexpensive, is easy to apply, and has high thermal resistance. However, its thermal resistance reduces up to 70% when water accumulation reaches 3%. Mineral fiber bats may replace fiberglass but have the same problems. What do we think about this as a revision? It can be, the feedback can be positive, it can be constructively critical, congratulatory, whatever you like. Let's start this way. What do we see that would still need fixing, ideally? Right, is in there several times. So ideally, we would want to try to weed those out. Okay. What else? I do want to say that, there are many ways you can go about revising this. This is a case where is might be necessary because you're defining. You're actually saying what it is. This is a case where the verb, we're not really worried about action so much here because we're actually talking about being. Okay? And it may be true here in some of these. We have has, which isn't a be verb. Okay? The other two we might want to do some work on. What else?
What if we put a comma after fiberglass and say fiberglass, comma, perhaps the most common exclamation type is exclusive here.
And actually, that makes more sense.
It does, yes. Fiberglass is, which is, was a kind of repetition we would want to get away from, and that solves the problem nicely. Yeah, I think that's a much better fix. Then we double this up. Instead of saying what it is and then further saying what it is, we sort of combine that into one, which is good. What else? What about the rest of it? One thing not here that we would certainly want to have is that citation. Didn't put that in the original, but that would certainly need to be there. Most of the rest of it's pretty good, though, right? I was very reluctant to say anything.
We could say that and has high thermal resistance, we could just remove that and say highly thermal resistant.
Instead of and has, highly thermal resistant.
So if we do that, then we take this out. Is inexpensive, easy to apply.
Highly thermal resistant.
And I was just talking with another pair about this. We need to repeat the verb if they're not all the same. If they can all operate off of one verb, is inexpensive, is easy to apply, is highly thermal resistant. Then we can just have the one verb. And that's, as we've said today, is important because then we're just down to one verb of being, one verb period for that sentence, which is good revising. We're trimming it down some more. So I agree with that. I think that's better. There are other ways we can say this. You said something like application friendly. Yeah. On mine where I was scribbling, I had written here something like costs less than ... so that instead of just saying is expensive, you could compare it to some other types. And that would avoid the be verb as well. But there are some choices you have to make when you're editing, and it may be that that's just the best way to say it. Because again, we're actually defining it. So referring to it with a verb of being might be necessary or advantageous here.
I think it's important to conserve the verb used. going to be developed, that is going to be examined.
Okay.
The most common isolation type used, or
Okay. So just keep used here then, is what you're saying. Yes? So what do the rest of you think about that? Perhaps the most common insulation type used, or just the most common insulation type?
because the stress is in the use. So the important thing is fiberglass insulation use.
Commonly used.
Okay. All right. Wow. There we go. Okay. Yeah, that was very strange. Eraser started writing. Perhaps the most commonly used insulation type. I was going to sort of argue the point that saying the most common insulation type implies use. But I actually think I like that better. I think that makes it more explicit. So I agree with you. I think that helps emphasize something that really needs to be emphasized. Okay, we're out of time. What I'd like to do is what we did in a previous workshop, which is take your revisions, make some comments, and then scan them and send them back to you so you can get a little bit of feedback about what we did today. We didn't have time to get to any others. Let me pull this back up. So our next one, again, every other Tuesday. The next one will be on April 1st. And this will be about incorporating graphics into your writing. As we've said before, at our workshops page, these materials will be available tomorrow. That's it. Thank you for coming. Please take all the food and drink you want so that we don't have to eat it and drink it all. Have a good week.